Dr. Bill Russell. Welcome to Speak Up St. Louis.
All right, thanks. I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to it for quite a while.
Yes, you just got back, did a little bit of traveling, you know, making art, doing cool stuff. And so, yeah, glad to have you on to be able to talk more about your story, all the different shared experiences that we've been talking about nonstop since you got here.
Right.
Yeah, and just anything else that comes up along the way.
All right.
For sure. So if you want to just take a quick moment and, just tell folks a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do?
All right. Okay. The short explanation is, if you look at the back of my card, it says artist, architect, musician, physician, and then under that it says autism at work. And that's sort of who I am. And those are some of the things I do. And how it plays out in sort of everyday stuff is I'm a conceptual folk artist, which is, I choose a part of it because it's unusual, gets people's attention.
It certainly does.
That's how I really think of my work. My work is how I interpret the world around me. Mm-hmm. And it can be, sometimes I do a lot of sort of political, topical, cultural stuff, but just because that's going on around me all the time.
Right.
And it beats getting really mad.
Got to have an outlet for these things.
Yeah, exactly. And but also, right now I'm finishing up a piece called Three Dog Kings, which are sort of a photo montage paste up of my last three dogs who died. And so, everyday things. Some days, sometimes I build stuff because of, I can get a whole pile of, like I just got a whole pile of organ pipes from Redgate Gallery first, and
that's so cool.
And I turned them into an installation for a show they're having on right now based on music, and they came from there, and that was, I remember when she invited me, she said, "This, we got a bunch of these pipe organ pipes," and I just said, "Okay, yeah, those are mine." And I showed up with some tape and some rope, and started building stuff.
Well, I'm glad you snatched them up, because if I would have heard about it, I would have had my hands on those.
That was like immediately when I read the post.
No question about it.
Just like, the pipes are mine. We'll talk about it later, but the pipes are mine.
Mm-hmm. It seems like, well, one, I think it's interesting the different ways that you are defining yourself through these different kind of segments. Mm-hmm. But it's also interesting too of how your work has taken you from these broad, larger, more conceptual kind of conversations to very much the personal, like to go the range of having your work talk about politics, but then going as personal as the passing of your three dogs,
right,
is very much of a different range. And so I'm curious on, when you're thinking about your work and maybe the materials and mediums, it kind of seems like you have that mentality of whatever in front of me, I'll figure it out.
Right. And part of it, it's like, I went to college in the 60s. I was, I avoided Vietnam. And from that early, more than likely my FBI file was started when I was 19, because I was an officer in a Students for Peace organization. But I've always been aware of those things, and part of it is, I was brought up a kid in the Congregationalist church. Mom was the church lady, and sort of did that till I was 14. So those kind of basic, I look at it, it's like, okay, if this person was my friend, how would I feel about what's happening to him? And that's kind of, a base for that. But also, and it's like, part of it is the way my mind works. It's just something pops in my brain, and I'm sure there's stimulations that bring it on, and I kind of, sometimes I'll follow those back, sometimes I don't care, and I'll just, kind of, something will pop in my head. I'll see a photograph. I used to do a lot of stuff out of the New York Times. I would find photographs there and tear them out, and some line from a story from something that happened to me would come out, and I accept them when they come, And I learned a long time ago, it's just easier to go with it than to not do it, because it's going to happen anyway. So
No, I think that's interesting though. Just the mentality of
Mm-hmm.
Finding different things that speak to you, whether the range of whether it's organ pipes or textiles or paper, and not because I think there's a lot, especially within art spaces and for artists, that idea of you have to have a medium, like you have to be known as a painter or a sculptor.
yeah, that's. I mean, I came of age like Duchamp, but like I'm a Duchampian, and it's sort of. And also, I'm more interested in something new, like new. I'm always after new information. I mean, I basically studied for 40 years. That's why I have more initials behind my name than in my name. But
And also, if you don't know who Marcel Duchamp is, please take some time.
yes,
Go look at the urinal.
he's
please.
that.
I mean,
and,
it's more than that. He's got a lot of really great
he's
work.
also the reason why I think like if it wasn't for him and his ideas, social practice art would not be the thing it is.
Right.
Because that kind of art is art is anything you say it is.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, you can call it, if that's what you want to call it, that's what it is. I'm good with it.
Right. I guess even from like the social practice work, are you, because I think, for everybody obviously experiences art differently. For you, what makes you excited about art? Because I know sometimes for me it's, the experiencing kind of in the moment, but also but I know what I've found recently is that I'm beginning to build more and more appreciation to hearing artists talk about their work or that. So when you are going to, whether you're listening about art or looking at art, or maybe just let's start there, the viewing of art, what makes you excited about, seeing new work?
It's a real visceral thing most of the time. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's like, just, if I'm looking at architecture, something that is just like, a fantastic design, or an innovative design. I mean, I'm of that school that sort of architecture is really the mirror of the society that it comes out of. And that's part of how and also for me, it's like if it gives me an insight into sort of another culture and other society, because sort of kind of my personal myth is I was adopted, and my mother was Irish and my father is unknown, which means, I'm an Irish bastard. What more could I ask for? But it also opens it up where I have a deep affection for Ireland for many, many reasons. But the other half is that sort of gives me the curiosity to look into other cultures, because it's like, I could be part of that. I could be, and also even a deeper worldview is that we're all the goddamn same. We all came, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or whatever the time is. We all came out of that same group. We're all, we're related to Cro-Magnon, or not, not Cro-Magnon. Also some of those too I've been reading, but, related to earlier species, that were similar to us. So, that whole thing is a means of wielding power for the most part. And so anyway, that's that.
No, for sure. And I think I'm trying to think of some art that I recently went and looked at that I was able to. Oh, I know what it is. So the St. Louis Art Museum in their contemporary wing, they had just put up. I don't know how long it was up prior, but I knew it was different. The setup was different. They had some new from their collection. They had a new setup of Ellsworth Kelly's, and I really enjoyed looking
I haven't
at
seen
those.
I haven't been there for a little while.
Yeah.
I missed the Monets.
Yeah. Who else is? I need to also go see. They had some Romare Beardens up that they haven't had on out on display in a while too. So that's another thing on my checklist as well. But there was something about just that experience of being able to sit down in this quiet space and looking at these large gestural shapes.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, that was just really enjoyable. and not to say that it had any more to do, and I think that's what's interesting about it, is that it didn't have anything more to do than the experience that I was personally having.
Yeah.
There wasn't any more conversation or like digging of like, oh, you need to more understand this mystery or puzzle that I'm trying to convey to you. Not to say that I don't like, the theory and thought behind work and the challenge of learning.
That experience of just, you look at it and it affects you sort of almost like pre-conscious. Mm-hmm. And, and then it's like, and a lot of times it's like, why I don't put much time into worrying about why I like something. Mm. A lot of time. I mean, sometimes it goes all over, but, how sort of, and how those things can lead to whole different paths. There was a guy named Mor Thiam who was running African music and dance workshop over in East St. Louis, and I kind of heard about it on KWMU, and then I missed it. And I'd been playing percussion since I was in grade school, and so I heard about the next year, and I went over, and I just kind of showed up without an instrument, and it was Mor Thiam was a master drummer from Senegal. He'd been with the Senegalese ballet, which is what they call their national dance, and Katherine Dunham had brought him over.
That is amazing you said that, because I picked up on that name because we had Sarah Burke on earlier in the episode.
Yes.
So Sarah.
I read that.
Yeah, Sarah, and so she's one of my mentors, and so she came on and talked about just the drums over there in East St. Louis and how powerful of an experience that was.
And I took these classes, and there was like master percussionists and master dancers from all over, mostly West Africa on that particular one. And when I learned that about it, I was pissed, because I had been a percussionist since I was 8 years old, and I knew nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And that just annoyed me. And then I'd been a dancer before that, and then to just the African dance and the expressiveness and stuff, and I ended up like sort of studying that, not in any great detail, would be sort of insulting to people who have, but enough to, and I still, those are still techniques, those are things, and I ended up being the house doctors for Katherine Dunham seminars for 10 years, and then for Black Dance USA with DeBorah Ahmed and the conference that they had here. I worked with them for like 25 years.
How have you allowed yourself the space to let your creativity take you to so many different places? Because to me at least, it seems like you have such a range and diversity of experiences in the arts, but also who you've met, how you've connected to folks, but also just the willingness to go look around the corner and see what's going on in an area that...
Part of it is I'm this weird guy who doesn't always have enough sense of things going on around him to feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm.
It's almost like also the not having, also like the sense of limitation, and may not also might be less of that as well too.
Right.
Because because even just some of the things of, oh, I've never experienced this before, there's just enough anxiety and fear around that of, let me just stay over here in what I'm comfortable and know. But for you, it seems that it's very much a, no, let's go try it. Let's see where,
where it takes me. That's that whole, like, this is something that could be part of who I am. Mm. And, some probably is, some probably isn't. A lot of it probably isn't, and I have no idea what it is, but it's that sense of adventure and that sense of discovering something new. And
but that's also a very additive mindset in a way, to just be able to say, okay, I'm going to take the time to, whether it's perceived like a perceived kind of risk or not, I'm going to put myself out there to experience something in a way that might have an impact on myself. And
also, it's like, once that gets in my brain, it's like, okay, we just better do it, and do it now, because otherwise it's still going to happen. It's just going to take a lot longer. you know.
Has that always been the case for you, especially like, you know, you have this very broad range of different creative expressions and experiences. Has that always been the case where it's like, when you kind of first were thinking of yourself as a creative, where it's like, oh, I'm just about trying different things and seeing where it takes me?
I mean, that was very much, I mean, my first degrees are in, you know, undergraduate in printmaking and ceramics, and then I have a graduate degree in weaving, which we call fiber arts now. And then I came to WashU and studied with a guy named Howard Jones in multimedia, and he was like early sound and light artist, sort of late 60s, early 70s. That's when I went there. And we were in like the multimedia department, and it was just like encouraged to try things and do things. We had, like I said, we had really rudimentary video camera equipment. You know, I mean, it took two people to carry a portable camera because one of you had to haul the motorcycle battery.
Good gracious, that's a lot of equipment.
Yeah. Oh, we'd strap it to an old backpack frame, and you'd have the recorder was like about this big and weighed a ton, and then you had to have a motorcycle battery strapped to that to run it, and then you had a camera that's like, you know, bigger than what studio cameras are now. That
Man, we've come a long way.
Oh yeah, and it's like, you know, a coax cable was like
now.
precious. You know, if you didn't put the coax cable back because they were so expensive and hard to come by, you lost your privileges. You know.
I've especially in college, I was a forgetful person. I would have definitely.
Oh yeah,
messed it up
like
a few
now
times.
it's like I have 2 cameras in my pocket at all times.
At all times.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's really just the way that it feels like to me, just like you really fluidly connect all these different experiences together, not just as, at least from what I'm perceiving, not just as an artist, but also but very much a way of living in that sense. Can you talk to like that part of it as well too, of how much art and just the practice of creativity is really kind of interwoven into just who you are?
Yeah, I mean, it started like kind of, you know, I went to college and sort of had no idea what that was until, you know, for me going to college was being able to move away from the house, joining a skin doving club, and, you know, studying to be an architect. And so I started off, and so, you know, the college we picked was in the top 10 party schools in the Playboy poll that year, so that, you know, it tells you my initial emphasis.
Reasoning.
Getting out of the house and
Have
living
a
on my
little fun.
own, and then I kind of discovered what it was. And you know, I learned enough about architecture to know, like back then it's like, you know, go look up stuff in the library. Now I look up stuff on my phone. And so I felt with the basic, I could go off and start doing it. And that's one of the things I've done over the years. That 3-dimensional space and architecture is really an underpinning of sort of everything I do in one way or another. And then I also, you know, met people who were into chemistry and people who were into physics, and sort of, you know, took classes with them, and studied with a lot of different people, came to WashU, and then Howard just really kind of opened up the possibilities of things. And, you know, like I said, I was very much a Duchampian. I started doing performance art. I started, you know, just try stuff, anything I could. And particularly, the nice thing, I looked at graduate school as sort of a safe environment to explore really anything that came to mind. And I figured a long time ago that I wasn't going to put the burden of making a living on my art, which I think is another kind of folk art kind of thing. That's like, you know, and I mean, I make, you know, I occasionally make some money off of it. That's not my goal. And actually I've only been doing that for the last 5 years. I think I didn't do my first mature work till I was 50. And for 20 years after that, I practiced anonymously just in order not to have to put energy into the mechanism of the art world, the commercial part of it.
Right.
and started doing, which is what brought me to Arctica, which I know something you're interested in.
For sure.
Like right at like 2000 is I did my first work. My first really mature work was as Charles and Charlotte Douglas Brooke, who are homeless identical twins. And those are, to me, those are part of my personality. They sort of come out of, literally I took the wrong exit and found myself back where I grew up outside of Kansas City, and started, went down to where we used to drag race, and then took these pictures and these stories from when I was a kid came up. And one of the things is I was adopted, and it was my parents had 2 kids who died within the first year before that, and sort of one was a boy and one was a girl, and that's where sort of the emphasis for Charles and Charlotte. So it's kind of, they were sort of the idea that sometimes I look at like sort of the idea of like people that I've never met who influenced my life, and they pretty heavily fall into that, I think. And then I started sort of, that's kind of when all the different things really started coming together, and whether it's performance or installation or whatever. And did work then, and I'd started doing a series of paste-up stuff on like sort of right at Jefferson and Washington. And I ran into Hapanita. I think it was the Dada Ball, and I was playing with the band. And Hapanita came, and so we were talking, and I started telling him about how I just started doing paste-up stuff with Charles and Charlotte. And sort of Nita gives me this sort of funny look, and she goes, we're starting to do something we think you might like. And so we're having a meeting next Sunday, and that was like the first meeting for Arctica. And there was probably about 8 or 9 of us, and we just kind of had some space they said we could use, and we used it, and it was down in like the same Arctica site. And like I said, they were both like cat people. And then I think probably the next year was we kind of, we got some funding, and we did that, and that our first sort of official Arctica was the same night as the opening of this museum. Which was a little annoying to us, to be honest.
A big institution is like, dang,
like,
totally
crap.
right. We totally get shady. Like,
yeah.
How do you get in front of that?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is like, I wanted to come, but I couldn't.
Right. I got my own event to attend.
Yeah.
For folks that don't know, could you explain what Arctica is?
Okay, Arctica is a 3-day installation and performance guerrilla art festival that happens down on the riverfront, just north of where the Admiral used to be. Right, sort of the Kerr building is kind of the corner of the space that we use. Mm-hmm. And it's been going on for 20 years, and it was, the basic requirements were, show up. I mean, if we didn't give you money, you showed up, did what you want, and cleaned up after yourself. And if we gave you money, it was, show up, make an honest effort to do what you say you were going to do, and then clean up after yourself.
always ending with clean up after yourself.
I mean, we gave money to people just because we knew the environment, we knew them, whatever. Who it's like, I mean, there was one of the artists who almost every year it's like, okay, he's not going to be able to do that, but what he's going to do is going to be so interesting that doesn't make any difference.
Right.
And we always gave them money. And sometimes we had like new artists who just didn't understand the terrain, and it's like, okay, well, that can't be done there, but they'll give it a hell of a try.
Right. I think that's really, I appreciate that you and the team are making space for just the effort
right, yeah.
of trying something, because I think so many times, as you know, with grants and other opportunities,
right.
it's you got to have finished work, a finished
right,
idea.
yeah.
It's got to be mature to this
right.
level. But how many times do early artists, folks that are beginning to kind of really grasp that level of creative practice, have spaces where they can actually have funding to just try?
Right, yeah. I mean, basically our purpose was to, beg money from art organizations and give it to artists.
Yeah, that's almost, it's interesting, shifting from, the more formal training of going to an institution that very much has a lot of that in an informal way of just like, we're going to support you in this way,
right, yeah.
and you're going to learn from it and grow from it as an artist itself. And I can imagine that the amount of artists that have come through it have probably looked back to that as like, that was that.
And it's like, I mean, we would tell them, it's like, if you've got something new that you want to try, this is the place. There's no downside.
Yeah. The experimentation of art, which is also just as important as, the white cube and clean spaces of a museum.
I mean, there's a lot of artists around town who that Artica was the first place that they came and exhibited their sculpture or whatever it was they did, and then sort of they gave them the experience and kind of like the encouragement to keep on doing it and expanding what they do and stuff, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah, I think especially for any city, but in particular St. Louis, I think having an ecosystem that allows for the range of the artists that are beginning to the more, early emerging artists, but also then the more mature one, like in the spaces that show at CAM and other places, I think is really important, because if you just have a ecosystem that is only showing matured work, that means you're not growing the next artist that will be able to show mature work, which means that they have to leave and go to other places to be able to find opportunities. I'm curious on that for you. Like, do you see St. Louis as a place that it has a healthy ecosystem for all those things, or do you think there's some places
I think it does. I think I find it to be sort of scattershot, because like I tend to go to lots of things from lots of different areas, and just there's kind of like the people that are associated with Webster, and then there's the Horseshoe people, and then there's the people that do this. There's the theater people. There's the dance people. There's the the performance art people, and there's not a lot of overlap. I mean, there can be, and there's certainly. I mean, that's the woman Audrey Symes, who I've worked with now for years. That's how I met her. Was she was a student out at Webster in the dance department. I invited her to the installation invitational used to do at my studio, and she shows up in a space that she'd never seen in the dark with street lights, and then performs some amazing thing. And then I remember sort of a couple of months after that, however long it was, when we cut the checks, and I came in. This is one year we didn't apply for a lot of money, so it worked out. Everybody got $100, and I walked out and handed her a check for $100, and she was just like, "I get paid for this," and that was like the beginning of our working together.
Right. Can you talk to the importance of artist-led organizations and efforts? Because I think that's also something that at least seems really important to at least this conversation as well, too, of having spaces and places that are ran by artists. Because sometimes you have spaces where not really ran by artists, so they miss the big part of kind of really connecting with the arts community.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that, of going from this personal creative to now working with a group of folks that really care about the arts, and probably artists themselves as well, too, saying, okay, we're going to come together to make space for others as well.
I mean, certainly Artica was like that, and like I served on the board for 20 years or so, somewhere in there. And right now, I mean, I'm on the auxiliary board for the Luminary, and for me, like you said, there's just a different mentality. I mean, there's always, when you run an organization, you have people who have to make a living from doing it, and all that kind of stuff. There's the requirements of bringing in money, so you need like confident grant writers and things like that. But when it's run by artists, it's just there's a different sensibility. And first off, it's like Kalia or something can go look at somebody, you just go, oh, this stuff is great. We need to get this in a show. And just without going, okay, well, where have you been? What have you done? What are you going to bring to our gallery? What's all those sort of commercial part of that, which, like I said, I didn't do it for years, and then the last 5 years I've been doing it, I had assistants who really did most of it. And unfortunately, one's becoming a famous singer, and the other one has moved to New York for 2 years. So
right, you gotta reset your deck. Got to get a new hand of cards.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm shifting some stuff around right now. I'm kind of moving into some different studio space I have, and with Monia Nakad and I are working on putting together like a 25-year retrospective of Charles and Charlotte's work. And so that's like long-term thing. That's something that it probably won't happen until she gets back. But and it's just from doing big shows like that. It took 2 years to put together the Kranzberg show. And part of it's because of we got 2 years because of COVID, but it took a long time, and it took to put a show like that together and just make it a seamless experience throughout the whole show and stuff, which Audrey did for the one at Kranzberg, and I think Monia and I are working on she's going to be the kind of the curatorial influence on this, and I like that. I like working with younger people. That's who I like to hang around with. And I like their ideas. And also it's a different, hardly anybody ever picks my favorite work as their favorite work. And I just have, it's like, it is what it is, Right. And stuff was like, how do you miss it? It's got such, and like, I have to write.
Well, that means you just got a good eye.
Yeah.
They tell everybody else to catch up.
Yeah.
And speaking of good eye, I also know you got a good eye for suits as well.
Yes.
Talk about just some of the textile work that you're doing,
okay.
And the story behind how you are creatively repurposing and resizing and doing all these cool things with suits and fabrics.
Like I said, I started out studying weaving in graduate school, and I learned early on in that coursework that it was a lot easier to buy something already woven than to weave it myself. And Audrey and I were we'd take our first road trip. We went to Grand Rapids to see a show by Ai Weiwei. And on sort of out of that came Fashion is My Life. And it was, because most of the time I look like a janitor, which I've been a janitor. That's how I put myself through college. But, and so I made some joke about Fashion is My Life. And then we decided to start a fashion line.
It's just the do-it mentality. I really love it.
And the first parts of that were, like I said, I had a suit that was a travel suit for back when I used to go on conferences and stuff. And there was somebody was in town was doing a show about collaboration. And so I took that, and sort of at the same time we were kind of in the process of abandoning our friends in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I wrote, collaborator across the back, and then down both sides of the leg of the suit it said, on one side it says, for the sake of my identity, and the other side says, for the sake of my family, I hide my identity. And I do that kind of stuff a lot, where I take like, sort of, okay, this is the commonly recognized meaning of a word, what's another version of that? And so that was one of them. And then I did a jacket that was sort of the tale of my grandmother migrating to Kansas City from California in 1900 in a covered wagon, and sort of kind of the idea there that was like, the dream of riches in the gold field didn't work out.
so came back to the
so they came back to Kansas City and slaughtered cows for worked in the slaughterhouse, and then sometimes they're like personal like that. Sometimes I do a lot of the social practice stuff like the pants I'm wearing has a picture of corn, and then the molecular makeup of the forever chemicals that are in everything we eat and drink, and we don't know what they're going to do to us. And like most recently, I was at Found by the Pound and realized that I could buy, $3 a pound. You can get a lot of shirts for not much money. And so I ended up doing a piece for the Luminary, 35 shirts with sort of different messages graffitied on the back. And some were political, some were, just interesting, some, a whole array of stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's an easy thing to work with. I like it. And also it's as much as like, rather than going out and spending, $150 on a cool pair of pants, I can, take a pair of seersucker pants I got used 10 years ago and, pin, close or safety pin pockets onto it, so I got more pockets.
It's just really interesting how taking the Duchamp mindset of just like the mundane and turning it not just within the art practice, but also just for like the actual practicality of doing it as well too. Of I like these. Yeah, they work the way, and I'm going to purpose it the way that I need to purpose it.
And that's the thing. It's like one of like being autistic. There's certain things that I sort of fixate on. Mm-hmm. One of them is having enough pockets. I have to have. I have to have cargo pants because I have something that has to be in every pocket when I leave the house. Okay. And if not, I will have to go back and get it.
It kind of messes up the day.
Yeah, exactly. It's
just,
or the
day
it's like,
can't start.
I'll be all right. I can go to the coffee. I don't need that second phone. It's like, oh, well. All right, I better just go get it. It's easier than...
Yeah, you got to start the day the way that you need to start the day.
I give myself 10 minutes to walk out of my house to the car.
Is there a particular amount of, is there a minimum amount of pockets that you need to have, or is it just depends on?
I can, if I'm going, if I'm coming to an opening or something like that, if I have to, I can get by with 2 pockets in my pants. It has to be. You
don't sound too happy about it just being 2 pockets.
I'm not working because I'm not going to have my calendar. I'm not going to have, I'm not going to have a phone. I'm not going to, I'm going to, I'm only going to have 1 notebook with me instead of 2. Different things going. One notebook is sort of where you write down everything, and then from that one, the important stuff I can transfer to the other one if I didn't have it with me. So.
Right.
And then I have to have 2 pockets on my shirts, but and it's just, like I said, it's just how it is.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with it.
No.
And, to that, the other one I wanted to shift to is just because, like I said, I feel like all the different things that you do have a very intentionality around creativity, your art expression, but also part of who you are. And for folks that are wondering, what in the world is that bird noise in the background? Aren't they generally in a room somewhere?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are at the Contemporary Art Museum in the conference room, which we turn into the podcasting station. But Bill also has a particular bird that he is playing on. Is it in loop, or is this just a long?
It's on it's a birding app that lists I think there's about 10 different songs, and then it just cycles through them.
Cycles through them, and so this is something that you actually do pretty regularly. Is that just for your? Is this just another? Is this another creative expression, or is this something where you feel? Because I know we were talking about a little bit of when you go to Mud House, that's very much a meditative thing. Is that kind of what that is for you?
It's more one of the. There's a couple of things to it. One, it's the bird is the eastern meadowlark, which is the state bird where I grew up in Kansas, and I do spend a lot of time out in sort of western Kansas in the prairie, and it's just a bird I really like. And I've been out there during early in the year mating season, and you'll see them all over the place. But to me, it's confusion is an important thing. Confusion is that's the seed of knowledge. The seed of that confusion brings curiosity, which then brings you to go and hopefully learn something new. And so I like that, and just the idea of it kind of something unexpected, something, and then like I said, I've had this program for about 10 years. I use it when I play experimental music. I'll use that when I'm playing with people sometimes. But I originally got it when I found read about the app. I got it specifically so I could play it in restaurants and watch people look for birds. It has grown from that, but
messing with people.
And it was like, sort of like, I like to cause a little shit once in a while.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, sort of.
Stir people up just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is to entertain myself.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very low threshold for boredom, and a lot of what I do is, like I said, to kind of entertain myself, keep my brain engaged.
It's interesting too, because I think even something as simple as taking something that we would consider an outdoor noise inside automatically changes the way that you perceive a space.
Yeah.
It takes you out of the it just takes you out of the mundane. So even though that I'm being very intentional about this conversation that we're having right now, there's another, like the second level, like my first priority is the conversation that I'm having with you. The second part is probably some of the thoughts around the conversation of some questions I want to ask you, but not too far behind that. It's like, it may not even be number 3. It's probably 2A to 2B is I'm tuning in to the experience of sound that you brought to not only to the space, but also to this episode. And I find that to be really interesting on how that small shift has such a big impact on the space, because you wouldn't expect bird noises in basically a full-on cement building that is the Contemporary Art Museum of St. Louis.
And it's like particularly, and it's interesting, like for the opening of the Red Gate Gallery show, that was part of the soundscape that I did for the show. And then it's like particularly it's much different, because then I'm like, there's people in the room, plus I'm like walking around, moving around, and so it's, you don't, like here you kind of hear it constantly and hear it change, but there it's like you might only catch like 1 or 2 bird songs, and then, the volume changes, the architecture changes.
Really cool.
And just, like you talked about here, just that sound, the sound that we hear is such a product of the architecture we're in.
Yeah. And so, that's interesting. So the way the space is formed dictates how you interact and perceive and hear things as well too. That's interesting. Because like automatically what I thought of was like, man, what if you had like speakers set up in all different places, and because of the way that the sound is played, like you might hear it in one corner, but it's really playing from the other corner. It's just they're like bouncing it from different speakers, and like so what seems close is actually far. I think there's some really interesting things that happen with that.
Yeah, some of that. It's like I said, like working with Howard Jones. He did. I remember he would do one of his pieces I really liked was he had like sort of a cascade of speakers going down the wall, and he just played sounds through it which mimicked, a waterfall and a stream out in the Ozarks.
That's cool. I think what's also interesting is just even that little bit of shift of sound. I feel like to a certain degree makes me even more present in the moment. Whereas if I was outdoors hearing that, it'd be like, okay, I understand within that context. And so how have other people perceived that when you're just playing the noises and they're looking around and they and people found out, oh, it's you?
That doesn't happen often, to be honest. But, there are certain people who just know that I do it.
And they're just like,
assume it's me and going
he's
about
up to
their
his
day.
shenanigans again.
It's like, oh, it's him again.
It's the bird man.
But and also, well, this is very, very melodic. I have a number of ones. There's a lot of owls that have these wonderful percussive sounds where it's just like hoo, 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 and we'll go on. And those are like really great when I'm jamming with like sort of electronic musicians. Because it's like an organic sound, but it has such a
Yeah.
Electronic precision to it, or just just enough that it's like it kind of sounds like could be made by spinning dials, but it's not quite perfect. I think some of that's like when I first started doing experimental music, was the Moog was like the brand new thing. And now I go in and watch somebody like 18 and Counting or something like that, and I'm just like blown away. I mean, I was doing it when it was like, oscillators and patch cords.
Shout out to Stan as well, too. Great guy. And that's what I was going to ask you, too. How much did bird noises kind of interact or have an impact within the music that you're either making, listening to, collaborating on, as well? But you kind of just touched on it some too, that it does it has some role, maybe not a large role, but some part.
It depends on who I'm playing with, depending on what we're doing. But I used to play sort of sit in with a guy named Sky Kingsland, who runs drum circles and teaches a lot of African stuff around, and sometimes I would sit in with him, and we would almost always play either the meadowlark or the Baltimore Oriole, as would be part of the African percussion that we were playing, and it just really felt well. It really fits really well there. And then I guess it's but also like it's. I play a lot of times. I play simple recordings like that. Sometimes it's birds. I have another piece that's like, I think it's like 37 versions of Streets of Laredo, which is, and I've done that. I might, with something like that, I might have two different phones going with two different like mics set up in the trees with sort of on different parts of that set just going off. Or, and it's also served as, kind of a background for other performance stuff we had, where it'd just be set up and just kind of go on its own. And while, Audrey and I would be over performing something else. And I think one time her and I did a improvisational installation at the Intersect Gallery. And it was a performance. It was that suit that I told you about earlier, the collaborator suit. She was wearing that. And we started off with nailing it to the wall with her in it. And also just because the whole thing, she was like, we'd never done it before, and her face was completely covered. And so part of what I did was every so many minutes, I would play a little section of something so she would know what the time was.
Okay.
Because our stuff tends to be an hour, and it's sort of, we tend to always kind of fall into like 20-minute acts. It's like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And even when we don't time it, that sort of just seems to be, I think she's been performing so long, that's, she's got that mindset. But, and so we'd use it, so there we're using it as a signal to, map the performance.
Signals, sounds, rhythms, finding multiple ways to use something that some folks would consider a bird noise, cool. But you found multiple ways of expressing it, but also, even to what you said earlier, found a new way to use something so there's less boredom within the experience itself, which I think is really impressive. So when you are doing traveling and things like that, are you looking for new bird noises, or is that just more so, or is this more so kind of encapsulated just within kind of that app and that relationship? I do sort of casually,
I like look at birds. I don't like keep track of them or anything. Like when the Ireland trip, Audrey Symes and I were, both of us like, we like birds and we pay attention to them, but we don't, it's like we're like, oh, good, I saw my first raptor and.
That's it. It's not like an avid bird watcher.
No.
We won't see Dr. Bill the bird watcher anytime soon.
Every once in a while. I mean, there's been a few times when I've gone out with like the spotter scope and just, not more than just, let's see if I can find that the bird I can hear. But, it's like, it's something that like we pay attention to, and it's like, oh yeah, I just saw a hawk get a squirrel out of the tree in the backyard.
So to kind of segue into that some, you brought up the trip to Ireland.
Yes.
That you just got back from, what, a couple weeks
about
ago?
a month ago.
About a month ago now?
And this is my 14th and last trip there probably. I started going in the mid-'70s.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when I first went was, kind of a journey of discovery to see how that fit into my sort of personal myth. And it was like, as soon as I stepped off the ferry onto the island, it's like, okay, yeah, this is it. It was just certain, okay, that's taken care of. We don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right. Check that off the list.
And I went over there and I loved the culture. I loved the country. And probably 40 years ago, I was like the school photographer when I was studying to be a doctor. And so I had access to all this equipment and loan money so I could afford to go to Ireland on break. And so there I went over twice, sort of a couple of years in a row. And I took a lot of pictures of different places, but there's one place called Bridget's Well, which is a sacred Celtic well, and then later on taken over as a Catholic well by St. Bridget, and Brigham is one of the three-headed female trinity of the Celts. Mm-hmm. And then sort of from that, that's where kind of St. Bridget came from, and over the same well. And very traditional, sort of old world Catholic, where people come and leave lots of talismans, statues and jewelry and photographs. And so over the last 40 years, I've taken, at least 4 times I've gone and very detailed photographed this place. And I've used a few shots out of it have been in my work over the years. And this is the last one. And now I'm sort of going to combine all that work into something. I'm still kind of just looking at it now. I'm going through and just looking at all the shots from Bridget Well. And there was another place with some sort of these sort of stone casket covers of the Earl and his wife that I've used. I've taken those, used those images and kind of split them in half and sort of turned them into kind of holy hermaphrodite characters, symbols. And I was going back to do that, and kind of also knew going back as my last time going there, so kind of saying bye to some places. And part of it is I'm too old to drive over there. I can't rent a car anymore, which is part of the reason Audrey went. But Audrey, she was my assistant too, so it was a paid gig for her.
Right. So it kind of worked out in that way.
Yeah, it worked out great. But and also we've worked together. We work together all the time and all that stuff. So, but that was the reason I went over there for that. And so kind of finishing up a body of work. And it's kind of, 40 years might be the longest series, but I do lots of stuff in series, and just things that there's probably architectural related stuff I've been doing since I was 15.
Yeah, so you went there kind of, it sounds like in a way that first time you went there and it's like, okay, check the box, did it, but it seems
and then it turned into so much more than that.
But it gave you so much more.
Yeah. It was like a big box.
Right. That's more than a big box,
right.
and
one of those multi-dimensional TARDIS boxes.
Right. So, to be working on a series for 40 years, what are some things that you took away from that? Because for some folks, the idea of working at one particular thing for 40 years, that's a long relationship with not only materials, but a place, your relationship to the place. There's a lot there. And so how do, like when you think 40 years of doing, like of focusing in on one, like this one particular type of thing, what are some of the key things maybe that you took away from that?
Some of that is part of how I kind of sort of segregate things, sort of, everything sort of in one level kind of intertwines and stuff, but things like that, it's just, and part of it, it's the way my mind works. It's like not really, I don't find it as an unusual thing to go back to something that I haven't worked on for a number of years and to be able to pick up at least what to me seems like right where I left off. And also those things kind of like float around for a while, and that was like kind of, I think, like last year, okay, we're going. It was sort of where we were going to go or not was sort of always up in the air, and we decided that, okay, it's got to happen now. And because I was like right at the end of when Audrey is going to be able to take 2 weeks out of her performance schedule, and like, we planned it, probably close to a year before we went, just to get it in her schedule so she could do it, because like, she's booked through next year. She's booked for over a year at a time these days. But it's not uncommon for me to like the Industry Perspective series is, I've probably been working on that for 15 years. And, I produced a number of stuff, a lot of the stuff that went into the Kranzberg show, the big, it was like 10 by 17 foot, I think of it as a quilt, but it was 8.5 by 11 photographs in plastic archival sheets, all stapled together into one big piece. And also I'm like, also working on some new, that's something that, I work on probably once a week. I'll be out someplace and taking photographs of architecture. And that I kind of think of looking at the world through the architectural lens. That's one of the ways. It's like, I don't understand people particularly well. And I sort of observe societal things, individuals, a lot of that I miss. But architecture that's kind of one of the things that I just sort of innately understood as a kid. Just that three-dimensional space is something that it comes natural to my brain. And so that's like something that's, I've been, like I said, I started doing architectural stuff, me and my friends building hideouts in the woods, and, as a young teenager from, and like I said, I started out to be, all through high school, I was going to be an architect, and went to a college in southeast Kansas to do pre-architecture because I lived too close to KU. If I went to KU, I would have lived at home, which was not an option. I don't think for either me or my mother.
You just knew that wasn't going to work out.
Yeah.
So with architecture, this might be a little bit broad, but I know you'll probably find somewhere to take it, which is exciting. I'm curious on whether it being previous, current, or even new things that are going on in St. Louis in regards to architecture. I guess I'm curious on, what do you think the architecture of St. Louis, what is the story that it's telling about us?
Architecture is one of the reasons I stayed in St. Louis. Part of it, it's like, I can't think of any place else somebody who really has been semi-retired my whole life as far as making money can own 2 properties and have big studio space, and I still work part-time. And just I have a house whose bricks were probably made from the clay they dug out of the hole for the basement. Just that connection to the land, to the people, to that sort of, make what you have out of what you got type of thing. And just some gorgeous architecture. I made my living as a restoration architect, primarily Victorian stuff, for about 12 years. And also it's just the stories and just like the family residue in a house that's been owned over decades, if not generations, is an amazing thing. And I remember when the whole thing with the mapping thing, and they were tearing down neighborhoods, there was somebody who moved their house, which was an option. And someone took it, and I remember I was sort of at the doctor's office in the waiting room, and there's this house being moved down the street. And it was just like one of the most glorious things I've ever seen. And, but yeah, I love buildings. It's a way that I understand how things, I can understand that kind of thing through like the memories that people have of a house in a space. And it just pisses me off to see whole neighborhoods wiped out as a means of basically siphoning off familial wealth into the hands of a few non-contributing investors is a nice way to describe them.
Or even the simpler term of quote unquote revitalization.
Yep. And it's like, it's like St. Louis is building a huge amount of apartments, but half the population can't afford to stay there.
Yeah. And also too, I feel like, because there's some things there's some new, buildings and things that I like, like I like the new soccer stadium. But I think there's some parts of some of the new modern things that are being built in St. Louis that don't really have any character or tell a story.
Yeah. Well, it's like,
and I feel like that's a missing part. Like St. Louis is so, like you said, St. Louis is so personal.
Right.
It's so like every neighborhood almost, to a certain degree, if we're just going off of the conversation around architecture, is saying something. And so then
you go in like in down the street from me, there's this little 3-room house, very small house, but it still has like fantastic brickwork on the front. Sort of ornamental brickwork and around the windows, and it's like it didn't take that much, And the new you see something like, okay, this is a $500,000 house, but it has absolutely no character. It's like, couldn't you have turned a row of brick 90 degrees around the front or something just to give it a friggin' line?
But I think that's a part of it, though, is that, I think that goes back to the relationship part. Like, if you've never had a relationship to this space and you're just coming here to build something and you haven't talked to the folks, if you haven't walked the neighborhoods, how would I ever imagine that you can build something that actually continues or enhances the story of the places that we live in? Right.
Well, there is some, there is some new architecture, and a lot of it is, the problem is what we get is, in my opinion, Missouri building standards are substandard. If they're building houses out of 2x4s and not 2x6s, there's not enough insulation from that point on. And that's just, that's a sign of the amount of care they're willing to put into the place to begin with, which, tells me that it's probably not going to last that long. Right. And they don't build them to last that long. I live in a house, my studio's in a house that's 200 years old.
Right. Some of these new houses probably won't last 40 to 50 years.
But they could. There's that, I would love to see, I think, if we can get it, if we can get people to care about it, there's like wonderful opportunities for, affordable housing. And it's like the same everywhere. It's like, oh no, my kids can't afford to buy a house. Well, then let somebody build something new in your neighborhood.
Right, do it differently.
Yeah. But so that it fits, so that it's, so you got, somebody's grandmother lives 2 doors down, and, you got that, sort of that communal thing of neighborhood rather than, sort of commuter neighborhoods where, you might see people when they're coming and going for work. But, that's the nice thing about, like, Cherokee seems to have, like a lot of artists living down there, and I think that's something that helps. I know my son, when he got out of grad school, he moved to St. Louis, not so much because I lived here, but because of the art scene on Cherokee.
Mm-hmm. So you live South St. Louis City,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, South St. Louis City I feel like has a good amount of character.
Yeah, I've been down there close to 50 years. I moved into Lafayette Square when most of the buildings were vacant, and my house had boarded up windows and a piece of plywood for the front door. And then I own a 1860s house now, and 1820s studio space, Benton Park West. And yeah, there's some, and like my building it used to have a dairy in the back, the one that I live in. So so you still have like those places where you still have like those early 1900s commercial places, which make interesting spaces to live, interesting spaces for studios. I think and they're getting expensive now, but there's still parts of South. If you go farther south, you go down around Chippewa and stuff, and Gravois Park. I know there are, Kransburg and Intersect are involved in building those properties down there.
Yeah.
Those little houses to me are like the gems. They're, most of them have, the basements are functional space. They're not too big, not too expensive to redo, easy to heat and cool afterwards. I mean, that's kind of a lot of these things. It's like, oh yeah, well, we're going to build them cheap so people can buy them, but oh yeah, it's going to bankrupt them to keep it cool in the summer so they don't die. But we won't talk about that now.
There's so many things with the housing market, but I think to the point is like, even when you were just telling the story of just like what those spaces are, I could visually see that. And I think it is a two-part thing. It's that it's not only the relationship to the larger context and the story of St. Louis, but it's also, does this architecture have a relationship to the community members that are already living there?
Right.
Or are we building this for folks that we are expecting to come?
Right.
That idea of if we build it, they'll come mentality. And I think that that's something that St. Louis has to really be more mindful of like, yes, it's great that new development and new opportunities and jobs, all the other things that they they tout about, when something comes. But at the same time, though, there has to be a balance to not, because, I think the larger conversation is the gentrification of spaces. But I think the more immediate thing that I'm more so talking about is just the direct relationship to how this building is not only functional, but also how does it enhance everything else around it in a way that makes it cohesive, rather than this monument or pillar that stands up in the center of a neighborhood where it was never intended to be.
Yeah. Well, you got, the simplest thing is like, you got the house in the middle of the block where grandma's always on the front porch and knows everybody. Those kinds of, or like, even institutional places like the schools. I remember I substitute taught when I was going to grad school, and the schools that seemed like great schools were sort of showcases of the neighborhood. Like the principal was at the front door, knew everybody's name, the brass railings were polished, and they seem to be doing relatively well in the school itself. Where the ones where everything is let to go, if you're in an environment that's not, why would you want to be here if you had a choice? Learning new stuff is not going to be that easy.
Right. Yeah. It's places and spaces matter, and so I think that, for that to be something that, really kind of, at least in this conversation, that at least from the way I understand it, kind of sets some of that foundation for your creative practice and expression that allows you to be able to walk into a space and see how, I think it's less about maybe necessarily how your creativity extends into that space, but at least in my mind and the way I see it is, okay, how does who I am and when I step into the space change it? Not from a hubris way, but from the way that you're expressing yourself through textile, the way that you're expressing yourself through some of your different art and all these other things, I think does in a way build some of that context that what we're talking about, how relationships and how having folks in there to tell the different stories of a space matter and are critical to it. Like the same way of like, you know, the way you talked about like Arctica and things like that.
Right.
An Arctica with no bill, you know, especially now, would be like, what's going on? Like, this is not, you know, like it changes the context of the space because of what you bring as an individual creates and help build the story with all these other people to make this larger story of, so when folks go to that space and Arctica's not there, they can stand there and be like, oh, this is over the air.
You know,
I
watching
remember
the lady burn or this really cool performance piece or, you know.
Yeah, and so it's
like,
interesting.
and it was interesting. I mean, it drew people. Almost, it was very common for some odd performance troupe or another who was passing through St. Louis would end up at Arctica. I mean, we had the Ghost Brigade, which was a theater group that was taking a raft down the Mississippi, and the weekend of Arctica, they got stopped up in Alton, because the Coast Guard says, we got to look at this boat closer before we let you go any farther. And so they had nothing to do, and they ended up coming to Arctica and, you know, putting on a show.
That's so cool.
And we've had, it's a common thing that happens to us. Somebody, you know, they'll just happen to be here, you know, they're in the weekend on their way to someplace else, or they're, you know, and you know, showing up, and it's like, you know, it was like a really interesting for just kind of, you know, this sort of vacant space when these groups of people kind of brought an energy there. It sort of drew in other energy that, you know, that didn't even know it was there, and just they're in the proximity and kind of got pulled into it too.
It's interesting because earlier you said that, you know, you felt like you don't understand people, but in a way, I think you do. I think you're.
I do in a way. It's like,
yeah.
On a one-to-one thing, I miss a lot of stuff. On part of it is just, I observe the people I'm around, you know, sort of almost, you know, pathologically.
Yeah.
And part of it is just, you know, I just sort of, like I said, it's like I have to be in just the right kind of mood to be an opening and sort of talk to everybody and stuff, and it usually has to do with what kind of pot I'm smoking.
Yeah.
But
and I guess to even add on to that a little bit, I think, you know, all those things that you're saying about yourself are obviously true because you know yourself better than I know you.
Yeah.
But I think in a way though too, like what I was going to earlier, I think because of the different ways that you have expressing not yourself but your creativity, it attracts people. So in a way, you may not necessarily, you know, some of those cues you might miss. But I think in a certain way, because of you just being who you are, it attracts folks in to be able to build communities, to build conversations, to build events.
And it's like I said, kind of the last 5 years, I've been kind of putting that. It's like kind of that first 20 years is sort of my default personality for one thing, but I've been changing that for the last 5 years. Part of it is, like early on, I came up with a 40-year plan. And it's like my first 40 years, primarily I studied, which is why I have all those letters. And kind of the second 40 years was kind of a combination of study and make art. And so, and the next 40 years is that's up for grabs. Right. But you know, I'm 75, so I'm working on making that transition. Whatever it turns out to be at 80.
Yeah, you got to give your space to, you know, make changes as you go.
And that's why, it's like you mentioned earlier, it's like really interesting when, you know, I'm talking to some sort of newly graduated artist and talking about a piece I've been working on for 30 years, which is, you know, longer than they've been alive.
Like the concept of that is, you're saying that spending the amount of time or more that I've actually been alive, you've been working on this one thing.
Yeah.
And for some, that's not an easy thing. That's a commitment level. Even if you leave it and come back, there's still a level of commitment to say that there's still more for me to not necessarily solve, because I don't think that's. I think, you know, some folks when they see art, there's like, I got to solve something. I don't know if that's necessarily the case.
It's more what new can I learn from it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm after.
What's the next question?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
So-
like when I was a little kid, I had people that, I always said I wanted to be a scientist,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just that, every new piece I do is an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm not someone who has, a great technique. I mean, just the other day I was like, just being fascinated by that ability of just kind of those subtle differences that you see in somebody's face that makes it possible for you to recognize them 10 years later, then that someone can take that and through like, sort of shading and lines can make an image that you can recognize as that person. And those subtle things that I'm constantly amazed by that. And just, it's like you said, you're not really a painter. It's like, it's like, I'm terrible at I'm a good draftsman. Like I said, that's why I wanted to be an architect, because I liked doing mechanical drawing so much when I was a kid.
Just give me the material. Let me go to my little corner and figure it out, and I'll produce something.
But these days I take photographs and blow them up, and then write on them and draw on them after that. I get the basic foundation down first.
And it's taking you a long way too.
Yeah, it keeps me interested, keeps me occupied.
Right, because we're not getting to anywhere near boredom around here. That's not a life well lived.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, as we are wrapping up, there are two questions that we ask every guest. Two-part question, whatever. Two questions, two-part. It's all the same thing. It's really two questions. The first part, or our first question is, one, what do you love most about St. Louis? And two, what do you most want to see change?
That's easy. The architecture is what I love most about St. Louis. So it's pretty obvious. But,
Right.
It's like what kept me here. It's what I'm constantly fascinated by every day. It's like I ride bike for my exercise, and I ride around the neighborhoods and ride up and down the alleys just to look at, what new buildings are going up, how are they doing it, some fascinating examples in particularly South St. Louis. What I'd like to see change, I'd like to see, and I think we have a chance of getting there actually, I'd like to see a city government that was more responsive to the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with one of our new mayoral prospects, Carrie Spencer, I think it's a possibility.
Yeah.
She's one of the reasons that the Cherokee neighborhood is as vital as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has a huge potential. I know so many artists and young people who moved here for the opportunities, my son among them, and I think it has a great potential. Mm-hmm. And now as sort of the things like this, the reach is, you don't have to be in New York. You don't, like you said, you have followers in Germany. You have just
shout out to whoever they are.
Yeah, but those connections. There's new ways of making those connections.
Right.
And I think this kind of stuff is going to help. But that's what I wish would happen.
For sure. And I think that even those two ideas, my hope is that, and I think we are headed in a direction to where those things are possible, to where the voice of the community in not just mayoral elections, but on multiple levels is being heard and is what we're leading with in the conversation. Now, we still got a lot of work to do because we know where St. Louis has come from.
Yes. Yes.
But I do think that
St. Louis was the example of gerrymandering when I was in high school in my civics book.
I think it's the case study for a lot of folks,
yes.
even in school still now, unfortunately. But fortunately, we have folks in the community that are doing the work, that are seeing St. Louis in a different perspective,
right,
and are finding new ways to continue to get us together to think about the possibilities. And Dr. Bill, I think you are one of those individuals.
Oh, well, thank you. I try.
Yeah. Hey, trying is still the effort of doing it. It's still taking that one step. And I think that the way that you've talked about your creative practice and expression, I think St. Louis could learn a thing or two about, maybe instead of doing this thing or being scared of the thing, why don't we just do it and see what happens and leave with a level of curiosity to be able to get us to new places and new conversations.
Yeah, I got used to making a fool of myself in public a long time ago.
So,
And once you get past that, it's like, oh yeah, there's no downside to this. I might learn not to do it again, but that's
right.
still something.
But you learn something from it.
Yeah.
And so I think that, being in a place to where we're not stagnant as a city, because there's a lot going on right now in the city. I think this is a very exciting time for St. Louis. But at the same time, we still got to be able to say, all right, we have to allow it's the same way that you allowed for new artists to be able to come in and say, I don't know if I can pull this off, but I'm willing to try.
Yeah.
Being able to really pour into, that new passion and fire that's happening here in St. Louis, so that rather than talking about St. Louis in the context of what we want it to be, we actually can live in the moment and say, it is what we always thought it could be. And I think that's a really exciting place to be.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Dr. Bill Russell, again for joining me today. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I was looking forward to it, and I wasn't disappointed in the least. Beyond my expectations.
Yes. Appreciate you again.